Hello and welcome to another Victoria 3 Developer Diary. This time we're going to be talking a little bit about the Treasury, and before I go into it, this is the banner image of the Dev Diary. We've seen it before, but it's one that I really like. I just want to talk about it a little bit. I love the art style. I've been saying that in every single one, and I also love that it's kind of showing the disparity between different pop classes, right? These people sitting on the floor feeding the pigeons, certainly not in the same social strata as, these posh people right here. The wealthy elites, I don't know. I just want to point out that I just think the art style is just amazing, and I want to keep banging on about it because it is just really, really good. But let's go into the Twitter teaser. First of all, tomorrow we'll be talking about Treasury. So for today's Dev Diary teaser, you get a look at the budget breakdown for the Ottomans, a country that starts with an inefficient tax system that is almost completely reliant on land and goods taxes. So there's a few things to have a look at here. Let's actually see if we can open the image in a new tab so it'll be easier to look at. A few things to basically take note of here. First off, what is this icon? Is it a plague? Potentially, possibly, probably not. If it is the year 1836, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense for it to be a plague. I did have a Google search, and the last major plague for the Ottoman Empire in their entire history, the last major one ended in, I think, 1819, if I remember rightly. I Googled it yesterday, so I don't remember. But it's, it might not be plague. It might be. It might be, a generated one. I mean, we are a month into the game at this point. It is the 3rd of February-ish. So we're about a month and a bit into the game. So it may be a plague that has sprung up. Who knows? It could just be something else. That's the first thing to take in mind. Secondly, I really like that there is gold reserves here. I think that is a really interesting mechanic that can be added. If you've got gold reserves that, as you can see at the bottom here, are not changing. If you are in a rather disastrous war, perhaps, maybe you're going to have to dip into your gold reserves to win said war, or maybe if you're, losing, or if you've beaten somebody in a war, maybe taking a portion of their gold reserves is going to be a way that you can, put a little bit of extra pain on your enemy at the end of it. It'd be interesting to see how it is used. Maybe we'll be shown that in this Dev Diary, maybe not, who knows. You can also see the way that the Ottoman government is run, most of their money coming from poll taxes and consumption taxes, not so much on dividend taxes. They also mint quite a lot of their own money, and they have some diplomatic pacts. This could be things like the Egyptian vassalageness. So that's maybe what they're being paid from Egypt. They've also got some others under their thumb. Wallachia, Moldavia, you can see in this image. Potentially Persia. I'm not sure if Persia starts beneath the Ottomans at this period. I think maybe not, actually. And then you can obviously see their expenses as well. How much they're paying on government buildings, the government wages, goods from military buildings, and then also their military wages. It's like I say, the Ottomans, they're right at the beginning of the game. Their problem is really that they can't efficiently tax their populace, and that's kind of how Paradox are simulating the sick man of Europe. So Ottomans, even in Victoria 2, once you were able to solve the problems that you had, the Ottomans are a very, very strong late game country. That maybe the same thing is going to be true here. That if you manage to solve the issues that the Ottomans have, namely their tax efficiency, the bureaucracy is very much behind the times, and also literacy incredibly low, then maybe you're going to be able to turn it around. But that'll be an interesting challenge. But anyway, that's the Twitter teaser. It's a decent Twitter teaser, but now we're going to go on to the Dev Diary itself. So, the Treasury. Hello and welcome to another development diary for Victoria 3. Today I'll be covering a topic that tends to be very much in the minds of governments of all eras, money. Specifically, we're going to be talking about income, expenses and debt and how they function on the national level. As I was mentioned all the way back in Dev Diary number 2, money is one of the principal resources you have to manage in Victoria 3. This in itself is nothing new. Money in some form playing a role in almost every grand strategy game we've ever released, but the way money works is a little different than what you might be used to. In most games, money tends to be a resource that you accumulate for a specific goal until you have enough of it to achieve that specific goal. For example, you might want to build a building that costs 100 money. Your monthly income is 10 money. That means in order to build said building, you have to wait 10 months to accumulate 100 money needed for the lump sum in order to construct said building. Things... instantly I'm thinking of, it costs 100 ducats base price, I think, to build things like the temples and the workshops in EU4, for example. So, yeah, but generally, that seems to be a fair enough comparison. Now you might be asking, why am I explaining such a simple and obvious mechanic that undoubtedly every single reader of this dev diary is completely familiar with? The reason for this is because in Victoria 3 there is no such thing as a lump sum cost. Instead, it's all about your weekly balance. At the end of every in-game week, your country's income and expenses are tallied up, and the result is then applied to your gold reserve or national debt. This also means that all forms of expenses, such as construction, also work on a weekly basis. You do not need any cash on hand to start construction of a dozen buildings at once, but if you don't have the revenue to support it, you might find yourself quickly going into debt. That's interesting. That is very, very interesting. So, I'm kind of thinking, are gold reserves, like, sort of acting like that lump sum area? Is that the deposit, the treasury is kind of like the gold reserves? Because, well, there's no lump sum cost to building something, though. It's just, the expenses of construction, both materials and the wages of the people who are making the construction. And I suppose going into a negative or increasing your national debt wouldn't be a terrible thing if you can, finish your building and then get back into the positive. But all positive results going into your gold reserves is interesting, because there's not an infinite amount of gold in the world. But if everyone's running a massive, positive, then potentially that could be a bit weird, right? Because you'd end up with just an infinite amount of gold in the world, and that's not realistic. Interesting. I will move on. But first, we've got this image. America's lack of income tax in 1836 sharply limits its potential for government spending. So yeah, there's no income tax, but you just have poll taxes and consumption taxes, same as the Ottomans. Income tax is going to be something that you'd want to pass in America, in the Ottomans, probably everywhere, because that's going to be the money maker. But they still make a lot of money, right? They've got fixed national expenses pretty similar to what we saw with the Ottomans, 70k, 72k, but their income is higher. They got money in the investment pool. This is the way that capitalists now work. Less from diplomatic pacts. They've got more from minting. Dividends taxes, were they a thing? Yeah, 10k for the Ottomans, got 14k for the Americans. But yeah, obviously you'd expect the Americans to be a bit more advanced at this stage. Balance excluding temporary expenses is plus 31.1, so I imagine, is that increasing then this gold reserve by 31.1 per week? Is that what's happening? It's cut off before you see the gold reserve, so I don't know. There's also new constructions on temporary national expenses. Again, that's going to be wages and materials to fund the constructions. But also there's one more thing that is very interesting in this screenshot, and it's one that's got some people very excited and other people quite worried, and that is this little dude here. Let me just open this in a new tab again, so we can zoom in on this. That is a Prussian Stahlhelm. Stahlhelm? It's a fucking helmet. A Prussian one. What's it doing? What's that doing? Is that the military symbol? Is it a stand-in for your armies before models have been created? Because it could be that, the reason we haven't seen any armies on any of the screenshots is because the models aren't completed yet. That's entirely possible. But what is this? What is this doing here? What does the 10 mean? what does it all mean? What does it all mean? I don't know. Are there 10 German helmets in wherever the hell this is? Is that like the Great Lakes? This is like maybe like Denver or something. I don't know where. I don't know American geography. Up here, Detroit is around there somewhere. I don't know. What does it mean? I'm super curious. I've seen some people thinking that it is a evidence of the military being completely reworked to be entirely strategic and, you know, removing all elements of player agency in moving armies and such. I think, again, I'm not going to stop harping on about this. I think it's a dreadful idea, and I do not want that at all, and I don't think this is evidence of it. What do I think? Honestly, there is no way to know. If that is a military symbol, it honestly could be the construction of a barracks, right? We've got a new construction going on. It could be that this is said new construction. Maybe this is a temporary symbol for it. Who knows? Right? There's many options. I don't think it is evidence of really anything at this stage in the game. But yeah, that's where I'm thinking at. Like I can't say. I don't know. I think it's useless to make guesses at this point. But yeah, if you have an idea of what this is, and you know, comments below, that's always the best place to put them. Anyway, let's move back into the dev diary. The gold reserve is your country's national stockpile of cash. If you're free of debt, any money that is left over in the weekly budget after expenses are subtracted is used to increase the gold reserve. Okay, so that is it. That is exactly what it is. So here we've got plus 31,000 that is being added to the gold reserve every week. That's how that works. Conversely, if your expenses exceed your income, this money is taken out of the gold reserve to balance the books. So, it's interesting, right? They're saying that there is no, like, treasury. But there kind of is. The gold reserve is that treasury. I suppose it's not... It's not saying that there is no treasury, is it? They're saying there's no lump sum costs, which is true. There's they're making the costs of buildings, like say if we were to translate this into EU4 terms, it'd be like, instead of your manufactory costing you 434 gold and you click it and it's a once and done, click it and it'll over time be built, right? Instead it's going to be you click it and then every month you're losing a little bit of that income, right? You're spending every month. So say it takes 40 months of 10 ducats every month to build your manufactory. That's basically what it's turning into here, right? Because we still have the gold reserve. It's just very interesting that instead of showing your treasury, it's showing your balance on your top bar. Unless the bar underneath it is showing your gold reserves, but then in that case, what happens when you hit your maximum amount of gold? I don't know. I don't know. Though it's certainly never bad in and of itself to have a sizable gold reserve, it isn't necessarily the best idea to continually run a large budget surplus. Each country has a gold reserve limit. Okay, that's what that is. That's what this is, the gold reserve limit. Once you hit it, bad things. Over which each surplus pound has diminishing returns on the gold reserve. If you have an enormous stockpile of gold, a surplus of 10k might only increase your stockpile by as little as 2k, meaning that you simply wasted the rest of your money. Hence, a country that finds its gold reserves filling up may want to consider finding a way to reinvest some of that money to avoid such wastage. I think that's an awesome idea. That is really cool, as long as there is a way to increase the size of your gold reserve limit, right? Because what this means is that you're not going to have problems with inflation. And I'm not talking about EU4's inflation, which is a little percentage that you can reduce by 2% if you just click one button. I'm not talking about that kind of inflation. What I'm talking about is the inflation of the economy in the entire world, right? There is a problem in late game EU4 where you just have so much money that you don't know how to spend it. It becomes worthless to you. Here, though, if you have more money, you are automatically going to have a little bit of a shackle put on you, because say you're increasing your money by 100,000 a week. If you hit your gold reserve cap, you're only going to be improving that by 20,000 gold a week. Whereas somebody who's making a lot less money, but is not at the gold cap, may be making 20,000 gold a week, and oh, that's actually the same, because they're not being limited. That's really cool. It is a way of stopping the snowball, right? This is a really interesting way of stopping the snowball, and I think that is a really, really cool idea. That needs commending. That's beautiful. I love it. So we've got the Spanish gold reserve here. It's grown to the point where the further stockpiling is becoming very inefficient, and they should really try and find better uses for some of that money. I do think it's funny that they chose the Spanish for this. And they've gone a few months. So we're in May 1836 at this point. So current gold reserves is 1.74. The limit is 1.5. So yeah, it'd be nice to see, can we increase that? I mean, you have to be able to. Spanish have a gold reserve limit of 1.5. The USA has 4.12, so there is ways somewhere. The excessive stockpiling of gold causes the gold price to rise. Your balance of 32.4k buys you the equivalent of only 23.7k worth of gold. So their gold is increasing by much smaller than their balance is. Yeah, I really like this system. I really, really like this system. This is ridiculously interesting. I am a big fan. I'm a really big fan. Oh, that's awesome. That's really, really nice. Also, this the graphics here, I'm a big fan of this as well. This is like, these clouds honestly have that same kind of painted quality as this, right? They look like they're made by the same person. I don't know. It just reminds me of it. I think this looks great. It looks great. But we will have more to talk about the graphics in just a moment. So, what if you're running a deficit and your gold reserve is all but tapped? Well, this is when debt comes into play. Beyond that point, each pound spent in excess of your income will result in automatically taking on debt. While this may sound like something you should avoid at all costs, it's not necessarily true. While you do have to pay interest on your loans, interest rates in Victoria 3 are relatively low. As long as you can avoid hitting your debt ceiling, growing your economy through deficit spending can actually be a very valid strategy. This is because the increase in revenues from minting and taxation may very well end up exceeding the interest payments, not to mention the benefits constructing new industries can have for your population. This is very similar to debt spending in EU4, right? If you want to take 50 loans and then build a bunch of manufactories, then the income you get from those manufactories will exceed the interest. And as long as you wait the amount of time before hitting bankruptcy button, or even just, you know, waiting until you can pay off your loans, like, it can be worth doing that sometimes. And it makes sense for countries to also do debt spending, because that's kind of, you know, realistic, which is nice. So yeah, hopefully you don't hit your debt ceiling, though. The debt ceiling, unlike the gold reserve, is not a soft cap. Once you hit it, your country will be in default, which is a terrible state to be in, and can only be recovered from if you manage to slash your expenses enough to put your weekly expenses back in the black, or if another country steps in and takes on your debt, which can have its own undesirable outcomes for you, but more on that later. I'll take on your debt as long as you give me all of your country. It's also possible to simply declare bankruptcy. I don't think it's a simple thing to do.
I declare bankruptcy!
But because the money you're borrowing against is actually the cash reserves of your country's buildings, which is actually what determines the size of your debt ceiling, this will have immensely negative consequences on your domestic industry. I wonder if the amount of buildings determines the size of the gold reserve as well. Even though Britain has taken several £million in debt, this isn't too much of an issue. Their advanced economy allows them a high debt ceiling, and the interest payments is only a small fraction of their spending. So we'll have a look at Britain here. Their investment pool there, what's their debt ceiling? Wait, is that this? I don't think so. Is it showing it at all? Pools. Oh, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the principal here. 2.07 million debt ceiling. Their interest payments... Oh, wait, no, there it is. Their credit limit is 8.36 million. And this is why it's that high. we can't see their income and to see how much of an income, how much they're expending on interest payments. I don't think. Yeah, this is the amount of debt they have. Their maximum debt is actually 8.36, and they've got a lot of credit left. But we can't see how much they're spending on interest payments to really see if that's the case. But okay then. Right, before we move on as well, I just want to point out, look at the graphics up here. Let's zoom in. Let's actually compare it to a previous image of Britain that we already have. Let's compare it to this image. So, what we have here on the left-hand side is an old image of Britain. This is from pre-release. This is from the image that had Cork as unlocalized country, I believe it was. And then look at what it looks like now. You can tell there's a big difference in many ways. There is more height, some more verticality, more, the height maps have been improved. There are now many, many more trees and forests. The cities look much more interesting, much better. The general color quality looks awesome. The sea has been improved. The comparison between these two shots is nothing short of just fucking great. I think this looks fantastic. I'm a big fan of the way that the graphics here have been improved. Is it really fair to call it graphic? It's not graphics, it's the textures. It's the textures. They've been massively improved since this was the shot that we were shown here. I mean, look here on the border between Scotland and England. This relatively flat plain of nothingness with no one of worth living here, especially not. Where's the River Tyne? I don't know which one's the River Tyne here. Whatever, wherever the River Tyne is, no one worthwhile living there. Look, I'm from the northeast, I have to say it. But then look at the comparison. Like, it's so much improved. This is fantastic stuff, and I wish they'd, focused a bit more on this and just actually said, oh yeah, by the way, we've also done this, because people have been saying that they don't like the textures, and so we made them better. Like, it's amazing. The turnaround is actually fantastic. I'm a big fan of the way it looks now. But yeah, I just wanted to point that out, that this just looks great. It'd be nice if we could see a bit more of the world, because it looks like this is also using those new textures. But then we look at the USA, and I think this is taken before those new textures were implemented, perhaps. But yeah, this looks great. This looks fantastic. To wrap up the dev diary, I'm going to briefly touch on the main forms of income and expenditures, though this is by no means an exhaustive list. Some forms of income and expenses, like taxes and salaries specifically, also have a level setting, where you can, for example, squeeze more taxes out of your population at the cost of reduced legitimacy and increased radicalization. So the budget here. Massive hike on the tax level to the highest level is a surefire way to bring more money and more political radicals. So we've got the payroll tax here. We've got income taxes, poll taxes, consumption taxes, and you'd be able to say, I think this button is, I want consumption taxes on alcohol and on tobacco and on opium, for example, just as an example. And I believe that costs you, is it authority? I want to say it's authority. Pretty sure it is authority. And I imagine there will be people lamenting the lack of sliders here, but for me, this does kind of make more sense than sliders. And I know that's a heretical thing to say, but it does make more sense than sliders, because if you think about it, what would be the logical extremes that you would need to go through to be changing the debt, changing your taxes by 1% and then looking and, oh, we've waited a week and we've seen that this 1% is not enough, so we'll change it another week. Like, imagine the amount of politicking that would have to go into changing your tax slider once every week to get the maximum amount or get it to exactly where you want it. It's just not feasible. Instead, having these, we're going to raise taxes by 15%. Boom, done. And you can't change it again for a little while. That seems more realistic to me. Maybe it could be... Maybe the best way to do it, like, it would be a compromise between. It'd be a slider and a confirmation button. Like, you slide it up to 15% from 0, and then once you're at 15%, you click the OK button. Now you can't change it for a while unless you spend a big amount of authority or some shit. That may be the best way to do it, but for now, I think, the buttons are perfectly reasonable. I don't see too much of an issue with it. So we also have dividend taxes, minting, money from the investment fund. Again, this is the capitalists. Diplomatic pacts, and then additional income could be things like war indemnities from your beaten rivals, that kind of thing. And then we got national expenses. We can have new constructions here. You can make them speed up, it looks like, at all, or you could pause all construction. Government wages, military wages, goods for military buildings, goods for government buildings. Nice. Bunch of stuff there. That's what you like to see. So the main types of income, not an exhaustive list, of course. Minting. All countries can generate some cash flow by printing or casting new currency in relation to their GDP. Minting provides all countries with the sum income, particularly those who have domestic goldfields, but is in itself insufficient for funding anything but the most minimalist of governments. If we have a look, minting here is 25,000. Compare it to your dividends taxes, it's like half. You get less from minting than you do from the diplomatic pacts from whatever country this is. I don't think there's any way of seeing on here who it is from. But yeah, like having a look at the Americans, minting is 17,000 compared to the rest of their income stuff. Looking at the Ottomans from yesterday as well, we have minting only worth 8,000. Yeah, you can tell from that. Income tax is a form of taxation collected on income where a certain percentage of the wages paid to workers in buildings is paid to the government. Poll taxes, a form of per capita taxation where a fixed sum of money is collected on each member of the workforce. Poll taxes are very regressive since they collect the same amount regardless of income. That's going to piss some people off. Land taxes, a special type of poll tax, is only collected on certain types of pops such as peasants. And then consumption tax, a tax that is levied directly on the specific good that is consumed by pops. Levying consumption taxes costs authority. I was right, yes it was. Again, this is just like, we're going to put a tax on tea. Which is something that the British did. Put a tax on tea, which people were completely fine with paying, and it was worth like, I want to say it was either 25 or 33% of our national income at one point, was the consumption tax on tea specifically, which is just, it's so fucking British. It is so fucking British. Dividends taxes, a tax that is applied to dividends paid to pops with an ownership stake in a building, tends to be a very progressive form of taxation, as usually only well-to-do pops have ownership of buildings. Things like your capitalist, your aristocracy, that kind of thing. Tariffs is something we plan to have in the game as a way to profit from goods being exported from your market, but we're not ready to talk about how exactly this will work just yet. Alright? So that's like, that'll probably come when we talk about trade. So, main types of expenses. Government wages, the salary of cost of employing pops in your government buildings, such as government administrations and ports. Government goods, material costs for your government buildings, for example, paper by the government administrations. Military wages are the salary of cost of pops serving in your army or navy. Military goods, various goods needed by your army and navy, such as small arms and barracks. Subsidies, cost of subsidizing specific buildings to ensure they remain competitive. You've got interest, the cost of making interest payments on your loans, if you have any. And then construction, the cost of constructing new buildings, both in goods required for the method of construction and wages paid to pops working in the construction industry. Alright, that's all for today. But it is not, because we have here some dev comments, and there's a meaty amount of them. There is a meaty amount of them, which is something we do like here. So, quite disappointed to see how clunky and ungranular the tax rate settings are. He is talking about this, which I've just talked about. There's a few reasons to get rid of sliders. Discrete options are clearer than sliders in what exactly you get for selecting each level. Don't want players to be babysitting and tweaking their sliders every week to get the perfect level of taxation and spending because we don't think it's a good gameplay flow. It's also very unrealistic. The idea that government will be making weekly adjustments to the tax rate without incensing the population is extremely unrealistic, and discrete levels allows us to make it so changing the tax level is something you can't be doing all the time, and that changes can have political consequences. Yeah, that's mainly the thing. Like, if you've got a slider, you'd only be able to really do granular changes to how pissed off the populace is. So if you'd be able to micromanage it to get it just below the point where people start getting pissed off, whereas with like solid buttons, like if you go up, they will be pissed off by this amount, or maybe you can add other things that aren't involved with, you know, a granular sliding scale, like I don't know, something solid and instant. The cost for changing it, for example, or something like that. I don't know. I hope some budget options will be replaced by sliders. There's going to be a lot of sliders here, aren't there? There's 5 options to manage a complex economy. Doesn't sound viable. There's 5 levels, but doesn't mean there are 5 options. There's a wide variety of different income streams. The effect pops differently instead. Land taxes only collected from peasants. What about the large landowners? Land tax will be collected from peasants, farmers, and aristocrats. All right. All right. Diplomatic pacts in another form of revenue was shown in screenshots, but not discussed in this post. I mean, it's not discussed, but it's shown. Yeah, it's shown in the screenshots. Anything you can tell us about those as a form of revenue source? Also, would the dividend taxes lower the investment pool contribution directly or indirectly? A few different forms of diplomatic pacts that can generate money, such as subject relationships. More in the later dev diary. Also, just completely got to ignore that question. Fair enough. How is inflation or deflation handled? If a lot of countries are pouring money into the void of their gold reserves at diminishing returns, would this actually affect the game's economy, or would it be handled by in-game systems? Right now, we don't have inflation mechanics. It's something we think we want in the game sooner or later, but likely not for release. Okay. Some DLC kind of thing. Okay. I mean, there's not really much to talk about there. It's like, yeah, we just don't have it. That's it. Would it be nice to have inflation? No. No, but not having inflation means that it's more understandable for people, right? Because you're not going to have wildly different costs to things based on things you may not have too much control over. Would it be more realistic to have inflation? Naturally. Would it be easier if it's not? Yes. Something that can be added later on as DLC, free updates and such. Yeah, I can see that being a reasonable thing to do. Like, because you'd need to get it right. So yeah, having it come in later, I'm okay with that. I'm very curious what money from the investment fund refers to as a revenue source. It's capitalists. Can governments actually siphon off money from some investment pool depending on its economic system in place? No, you receive money from it only to cover expenses for the type of constructions it may be used for. Buildings. When it comes to debt, the government needs to pay off. Will historical debt from Napoleonic Wars and prior still be something that countries have to pay off? I.e., do the British still have the debt they have to pay off from the South Sea bubble fiasco? At the moment, we don't have this in for most countries. I'm split on the idea it would be a nice historical detail, but at the same time, having countries start with the game in dire financial strait may not feel good gameplay-wise. Yeah, we spent a shit ton of money defeating that bastard, so would it be nice to have it in? I mean, it'd be realistic. It would be realistic. Also, have some like opinion thing with Russia and Prussia. It's like, oh, we really like the British because they gave us fucking gargantuan amounts of money and goods to help us fight Napoleon. It's like just ungodly levels of produce. It might not feel good gameplay-wise to start the game in debt, but it would be historical, so yeah. I'm split. Mostly concerned with your mention of tariffs. Tariffs were an extremely huge part of the United States economy strategy at this time, and a key point of contention between the industrial North, who wanted high tariffs, and the South, who wanted low tariffs. So the question is, can tariffs be used to protect local industries in Vic 3, and not just a way to earn money from exports? Yes, the idea with tariffs is that it should both be a way to earn money and protect domestic industries. We haven't actually finalized and implemented them yet, which is why I can't tell you on how they work. Yeah, I mean, it's like, he says, right here, we're not ready to talk about them. I'm not sure why there are questions asked about it. All you know about tariffs, we plan to have them in the game as a way to profit from goods being exported from your market. That's it. Like, it's less than a sentence. We're not ready to talk about it means don't fucking ask questions about it. I just think it's a silly question to ask. Thank you for the clarification. Or reserve judgment until I actually play the game. I imagine this is Sliders. Sliders Man. This is Sliders Man. Just concerned that we may be in a situation where we choose a tax rate which is higher than the optimal one, costing us legitimacy and unrest only because we didn't have the option to select a rate closer to the optimal one. Especially if options are 5 to 10% apart, but anyway, we'll be able to tell whether it's true when we play the game. It's like, again, you're basically asking for the ability to micromanage your slider to a incremental, point. It's like, I want it to be 2.3% lower, and I'm going to check every week to see if this is the ideal thing. It's like, what government has an ideal, perfect tax thing, right? None. None do. None. So the idea that you can is pie in the sky. The idea is generally that your income taxes, poll taxes, and other such base taxes are determined by laws and you can adjust levels, but you should not be doing this all the time. While you can use more flexible measures like consumption taxes and tariffs if you need to make up a smaller deficit or raise short-term revenue. It's also a lot less important to have optimal revenue stream due to the removal of lump sum spending and generous loan system. Yeah, that's a fair point as well. The way that income is changed means that, having just like a gargantuan amount of extra wealth is just not necessary and detrimental. In fact, I think that's, again, I just really, really like that idea. Does it mean that a investment pool, which we haven't talked about yet, is used to construct or expand industries, get listed as government revenue until construction is complete? I'm a bit confused why this is listed as such, so the player knows exactly how much money is being taken from the investment pool. The expense for the building is always listed, while any money you're drawing from the investment fund to pay for it is listed as income up to the maximum of spending. It's done purely for clarity, as before we did it so it would be quite hard to understand when you're actually tapping your investment fund. Again, the investment fund is the way that capitalists work now. Instead of the capitalists basically building shit on their own with laissez-faire, which is just awful. Historical, but awful and not fun. Now they give money into the investment fund and you use that investment fund to build buildings. It's just a way to show it a bit more easily, I guess. It feels like an important thing to have for Haiti, as they owed massive debts to France that they didn't finish paying until the 1940s, which massively impacted on their economic development. Yeah, well, if you play Haiti, you're going to be already, without the debt, in a whole lot of hurt and pain, because that seems like an awful country to play as. They're in a pretty shitty situation. But apparently they have special content for their debts to France in Haiti anyway. So get fucked, Haitian players, I guess. Good luck. Good luck. Although it'd be funny if, France is like relying on these debts. They're probably not. If France is relying on the debts to be paid, and Spain comes in like, yeah, this is mine now. And France are like, where's my debt money? I want my debt money. Are paying tribute and paying war reparation from peace deal a source of income expense in Big 3? Both of these exist, but more on that when we talk about diplomacy. Big comment about construction. Workers need to work on the constructions? Yes. Does use workforces and goods. Where do the workers come from? We'll learn in a later thing, but I guess it'll be the laborer pop type. US image shows US using taxes, except that during this era they largely didn't until they passed the income tax and relied on tariffs. So I'm curious to why they're using poll and dividend taxes. So the US states, the United States, okay, did collect poll taxes during the era, even if the federal government did not. We're also not going to be 100% accurately represent which countries did collect what taxes and what level, because our economy is not a fully accurate scale model. In general, the tax burden compared to GDP is quite a bit higher in Victoria 3 than it was in history. And the same is true for both Vic 2 and Vic 1. But we'll try to have at least major themes like the US lack of an income tax represented. Tariffs are actually not implemented yet, so that's why they're not there yet. So it's probably going to see the US having way more income than the, I think it was 30,000 that they had in the Dev Diary. Is debt paid periodically, or does it require player action? As long as you have a positive balance, you'll continually pay off the national debt using that surplus. So it won't be like the Victoria 2 system where you have a little box at the bottom corner saying that, oh, by the way, here's all the debts you owe to all the different countries, and you click a button, make a slider, and then pay it all off at once when you have the money. I notice your income tax seems to hit poorer strata more. Is that because poor people tend to have their income be specifically from taxes, while richer people not? or is it possible to specify by some other means different levels of flat tax? It's because the income tax law, payroll taxes, is a regressive form of taxation. There's also flat and progressive forms. Alright. I think it'd be great to have some, maybe as a game rule if possible. I mean, are you talking about sliders? No, debts. But yeah, maybe as a game rule, historical debts or not. Sure, players like a challenge of trying to rescue countries out of dire financial situation and the feeling of leading them back to the black. It's not a bad idea, no promises, but I'll note it down something I might do. That's really nice. That's really nice that you'd say that. It would, honestly, it would make Britain less OP if they started with massive amounts of debt that you had to recover from. Although, recover from is maybe a little bit of a misnomer because, you know, they are the largest country in the history of the world and their income is gargantuan. So, sure, there's a bit of debt, but it shouldn't be too much of an issue if there's no, you know, world wars happening so soon after Napoleon. So the state borrows money from buildings reserves. Will the state pay interest to the buildings? Will the buildings not be able to use that money that they lent, or is that abstracted away? At the current build of the game, interest payments is purely a negative and disappear into a black hole. We're going to prototype paying that interest out proportionally to shareholders, so with any luck that's how it will work on release. The only hesitation is that mechanics which favour pops at the temporary expense of the player, or vice versa, aren't clearly good or bad for the player, which presents certain challenges in framing, explanation, and game dynamics. For example, a country that's deep into debt would pay a lot of interest to captains of industry, who are quite pleased with that as the payments afford them greater luxuries, when actually they should probably be worried that debt will be defaulted on and encourage government austerity and repayment. But if the country managed to climb out of debt, they're now punished by the factory owners who are mad their piles of gold are slightly smaller today. But this kind of stuff is Vicky through and through, so we're going to do our best to make it work right. Nice. As for the buildings being unable to use the money lent, the way it works is that if a building has to tap into its reserves, if this causes the total cash reserves in the nation to shrink below the current debt principle, the country goes into default. So buildings can still use the money lent by basically demanding to be repaid, but while the country is in the state, it can declare bankruptcy and bail on all lenders. It's a nice way of doing it. Yeah. So, to explain how my thought process on that then, buildings and the country's kind of money being that intrinsically linked it's interesting, right? Because it looks like the more buildings you build, the more your debt ceiling is going to be, the more your gold ceiling probably is going to be. But going down on that, like going into massive amounts of debt is going to be, it looks like maybe more painful as a result, if you end up going into debt at that point. Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. I can't wait to play and like fully understand what I'm reading, because I'm trying my hardest, but it's going to take a little time, you know. Every week, Vic 3 looks nicer and nicer. 2 questions. Minting more money would result in some kind of inflation. There is no inflation yet. Minting money doesn't have an adverse effect as you're not able to adjust the minting level yourself. It's scaled automatically to a fraction of GDP. You can see the GDP, for example, here. The GDP is 13.9 million in the Ottomans Empire. The Britain's Empire is 44.7 million. Spanish is 7.5 million. And the US is 29.6 million. Those, that's the GDP right there. To the degree that money supply is increased in relation to what's needed to prevent deflation, but not enough to cause inflation. If we decide to add monetary policy settings, though, this is exactly where it would hook in. Okay, so there's no inflation right now. We've already seen that in a previous comment. But if inflation was to become a thing, we'd probably get a slider, a button on here somewhere to change the minting level. If you increase it, you increase inflation, but you'd also get more money. If you decrease it, you would cause a bit of deflation because you're not minting enough to keep up with the increasing GDP. And you'd cause deflation like that, but also a little bit of austerity probably. I like that. I like that idea. Would it make sense to increase the maximum tax rates to achieve more radicalization? If you want to create a socialist or some kind of tax haven country, for example. Absolutely. Punitive taxes on specific segments of the population, which can also be precisely targeted by hard taxes on specific consumer goods to build up radicalization to power up certain popular movements, is a perfectly valid galaxy brain move. Fair enough. Bit worried that a low-tech building, if I understand correctly, if slightly profitable, would have exactly the same cash reserves as a high-end super profitable one, so debt capacity will be linked to the number of buildings and not actual GDP. Would you consider linking part of the debt capacity to high strata pop's wealth to represent investment in government bonds and also reward tall play? So the debt ceiling, the cash reserves affecting debt capacity. Debt capacity, that's the word I'm looking for. Debt capacity is linked to the level of building and can vary by type. So a wheat farm might have a lower cash reserve maximum per level than a steel mill. So yeah, this is basically what he's worried about, is the exact same cash reserve as a high-end profitable one, but it's not the case, because unless it's two steel mills of the same level that are making different amounts of money based on being in a different area, being at different levels of infrastructure perhaps, maybe then they'll have the same cash reserve. The high-end super profitable industries will be expanded while lower tech ones will become irrelevant, so most of your debt ceiling will be provided by those industries. Similarly, rich high strata pops will be the shareholders in those buildings, so it is actually their wealth we're representing. Nice. An idea that was floated up thread is to treat the amount of credit limit and debt ceiling a country is using as a measure of the market's trust in them. If you had modest debts, such as England in the dev diary, people are more confident that you'll repay them than if you're running very close to the red line. So modest deficit spending might have its supporters among your pops, but if it spirals out of control, they'll steadily be more worried. So our first debt model during early prototyping did exactly use that escalating interest rates. The closer your debt ceiling you got, for exactly these reasons. In practice, since compounding interest and escalating interest rate becomes exponential, it made for terrible unfun death spirals where if your investments didn't all pan out perfectly, all you could do was sit and wait for bankruptcy. Discourage players from deficit spending, which is the exact opposite we wanted from our loan system. So nice idea, but it didn't work. It's nice, it's like, oh, we had this idea. It's like, oh yeah, we tried that. It didn't work. End of story. Would it be possible to tie minting to a building, and can the player create new taxes or remove any of these? Any gold fields the country controls add a fixed amount of money to the minting revenue stream. Several of the tax categories are controlled by laws which the player can change or abolish, thus creating or destroying revenue streams. A question on tariffs, it should indeed have said there are a way to make money on goods exported to your market, not from your market. Fair enough. Alright, that's funny. That's the dev diary. That is what we have for you today, and gotta say, I am I'm top of my head a little bit. No, it's very interesting, right? I think the change from lump sum spending to expenses and income as the main thing you're going to be working with is inspired. I fucking love that. That is really interesting to me, and I think I kind of want to see that elsewhere as well. Like, I want to see that in other games. I don't know if it makes sense, but I'm imagining EU4 with that system. I'm imagining Imperial Rome with that system, and I'm liking what I'm imagining, you know? I think it's a really, really interesting system. And it does more accurately represent, like, what you're doing. You're paying people, you're paying wages to construction workers over time. Like, if you have a project, a building that is being constructed, you don't have the perfect idea of how much it's going to cost, right? Never do. You can have a budget, like government budgets for different, infrastructure projects. How often do they come out exactly on budget? I would posit probably 0% of the time, all right? Because that's not how it works. You don't just have, okay, here's the money, take the money, and then this is how much it's going to cost, and it'll be done. Right, you're paying people their wages as they work on your project. You're paying for the materials as they're being used in your project, and then once your project is done, then you can look back and see how much it costs. Whether you're going to be able to do that here, I don't know. It'd be interesting though if you could click on the building after it's completed and see, okay, so this actually cost me over the 18 months that it was being built. It cost me this amount of money. And a very similar building could cost a vastly different amount of money because the availability of both workers and of materials was different at that time. I think that's super interesting. And yeah, that's my main takeaway from this. I fucking love this new monetary system. I think it's inspired, and I'm a big fan of it. Sliders. It would have been nice to have sliders with a a cooldown. You slide it where you want it, then you click a button, and then it's cooled down for however long it's going to be. But I honestly gotta say that I prefer these button systems to just unrestricted sliderism. This makes more logical sense to me than sliders do. Even if sliders are a bit more granular, a bit more, you can do what you want with them. I still think this is more realistic, if I'm being honest. Yeah, no, I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of all of this. This has been a good dev diary. I think people are gonna like it. I want to know what this means. I like this. The changes to the graphics. I think that's fantastic. What do you think? Let me know in the comment section below what your thoughts are on this dev diary. Let me know if you love or hate the new monetary system. Do you love or hate the lack of sliders? Let me know in the comment section below. I'll be interested to read your thoughts. But until next time, thank you very much for watching. If you want to keep up to date with all of the Victoria 3 news and updates, hit subscribe, click a like on the video, all that YouTube jazz, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.